about the pressure. It's about the roar.
We're still here, I'm pleased to say, with Gary Jaqques, the legendary and renowned Vibealite promoter. He's talked about how he started off the event with help from Mr. Majika and others, and how he started those first few events. But I think it's time to ask him a little bit more about some of the biggest and best raves he's ever put on, some of the times where it went wrong, and of course we need to talk to him about what he's up to these days. Hello, Mr. Jaqques, how are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
So let's continue this. You've talked about those early stages, and it was a hobby. It was an enjoyable hobby, but it did eventually become a job for you. Talk us about how you progressed through the Fantasia. I mean, it sounded like you, even though it was a hobby, you went pretty full on, and it was probably inevitable that it was eventually going to become a business rather than a hobby.
It was a hobby, but it was a hobby for a very short event. By the third event, my accountant was saying, "You can't have a hobby turning this sort of money over." Not a hobby.
Well, that's a nice position to be in, isn't it? I wish I could say the same about Raw.
Well, hopefully,
One day.
Yeah, you say you can't have this sort of event. I mean, what set the Vibealite, like I say, was the initial meeting with myself, Martin, Majika, and Mongoose, and it all come about from there. There was only two of us that was ever going to put the money in, myself and Martin. We came up with a concept. Majika gave us the insight into the Adrenaline Boys, to design the flyers the way that we wanted to design in our concept that we had, and develop that. But from that, the other thing that we did was one of the first promoters to do, which also stuck out, which catapulted into the, as a raver, when you come out of a rave, your ears are buzzing, you get back in the car, you drive home, all you hear is the ringing of the rave. To have a set that you just listen to, you're waiting for the tape packs to come out a week later, but you know, we invested heavily in some recording equipment, and we, from the very first event, you could buy that DJ set before. So you went home with the favourite DJ set.
Whose idea was that?
It was mine as a raver. That's what I was missing as a raver. You know, it's like, I can't wait a week for a tape pack to come out or a tape to come out. I want to go home and I want to listen to that set that I've just listened to. You know what I mean? It was like, again, that had never been done before. And it's still hasn't been done to this day.
I bought one at Fantasy Island in 2002. I think it was the Brisk set on the New Year's Eve. I will say the quality wasn't great, but it was nice to have it straight away.
It wasn't great. We had hundreds and hundreds of problems. We invested heavily in master tapes, which was real metal to metal tapes that we then put into a machine, and then we copy 3 or 4 copies, and then we had an add-on machine that copies 7 copies and 11 copies, and went up to 20 odd copies at a time. But that was done from a metal tape to a metal tape. We had a backup, which was a DAT that recorded everything digitally. But the fact that you got that set on the night home and you paid a $5 for it or something like that, but you got it as you walked out, so you'd listen to 10 hours of music and you could pick and choose the 3 or 4 tapes if you've got any money left in your pocket by the end of the night. And it was an instant hit. It was an instant hit, you know. So whereas the larger events was getting their tape packs, you know, the doubles, there were doubles. When first started off, it was single tapes, then it went to double packs. They was getting them in the shops about 2 weeks after the event. Literally, you buy mine at the event, and then Saturday morning, anything we didn't sell was took down to the shop in Mansfield, and they'd sell them virtually the day after the event. So the event finished at 8 o'clock, and at 9 o'clock, all the unsold tape was on sale in the shop. It was queuing out the door for people that had been either to the event or that hadn't been to the event but wanted to hear the set from literally 2 hours ago. You know what I mean? So it was so that changed the way that we decided to run Vibealite unnecessarily, because it meant we could put more into the parties. It allowed us to use the ticket money to use as promotions and to produce production and to fulfill the things that we couldn't do, because we was actually earning the money from the tape machines and the merchandise, and by the third event, I think we'd got a T-shirt on, you know. The logo. By the second event, the logo had been born, to be quite honest with you. The logo just came to me from, to be honest, it was the Vibealite advert on television.
Did you know, did they never have any problems with them in terms of copyright?
Yeah. Did get a letter from Kraft at some point.
But didn't you also call your promotions company Crafty Promotions?
Yeah, it was all part of it.
It was all nicked, basically.
It was an inspiration on everything. Don't forget, there was all sorts of things going on. There was cheesy quavers, there was all sorts of things that, you know, washing powders were being used. You know, this was just it was just in the moment. This was what was happening. We was imitating things around us, but nothing more fitted this product and this brand than the Vibealite, light vibes. It was getting, you know, very drum and bassy around the scene. We were still playing 3 styles of music within the venues, you know, and for DJs coming up, you know, like Kenny Ken, for instance. I'll never forget his face. He came up and he played at Venue 44 before as a Zest DJ. But when he came up to Vibealite, and the venue was rammed, packed solid, and he played after Lenny D. Now, I don't know if you know Lenny D, but at that time he was probably known as one of the hardest DJs in the world. Right, an American guy.
I think he's still pretty hard, to be honest.
Yeah, he's pretty hard. So the dance floor didn't move. Do you know what I mean? We were so lucky that the people that was coming to the early ravers was there for their moment. Whatever you threw at them, they didn't move. Do you know what I mean? This is, you know, the second, third, fourth event or something like that. The Lenny D one sticks in my mind really a lot because the face on Kenny Ken when he came through the door, you came in through the back of the venue, so you've seen the whole production. It was that first impression. You was behind all the ravers. All the ravers were facing one way. They was facing the laser. They were looking at the production. They was looking at all the things that we'd hung up from the roofs. It was like mind blowing. You know what I mean? But by the time Kenny Ken had walked from the back door right to the front and got up onto the stage, he was physically trembling. Just do your stuff. Just play what you've been paid to play. Just do what you do. He was so nervous. He never moved. The dance floor stayed the same and just went straight into a Kenny Ken set, you know, a jump up drum and bass. Nice. Straight from like a 250 beats or 200 beats per minute into that. And it blew his mind. So it wasn't just ravers talking about it. It was artists. You know, artists were talking. You go there, you get paid first. You know, yeah, fucking hell, right. It's not heard of. You know, it's like relaxed, you know, and you treated artists, you know, if they wanted water, they wanted drinks, or, you know, they could have alcohol if they sat in a certain position, because we wasn't allowed to do alcohol.
X amount of pressure, X amount of roar.
It was obviously incredibly successful as an event, both among ravers and artists. What then, in your mind, over the years, was the best rave that you put on, and why? And you did it in a whole range of different places.
I think by the third event, the Carl Cox concept, when, bearing in mind, we opened at 10 o'clock and we danced till 8 o'clock, which was a good 10 hours of completely dancing. The Carl Cox concept, we ended the night on Easy Groove, 7 till 8. Right. And at 8 o'clock, there was nobody leaving. You know, it was nobody sat down. Everybody was dancing. It was Easy Groove, a hard DJ, not as hard as Lenny D, but he was hard DJ. He was renowned for being hard. And nobody left. 8 o'clock. Nobody wanted to go anywhere. And again, this is the third event. Private Members Club, we announced at 8 o'clock, we're staying up until 10.
I mean, the idea of that now makes me feel physically sick.
Me too. But, you know, you can't throw people out when you've got a full dance floor. They was not going to go anywhere. We could not have done it if we was a licensed venue. We were a private members club. We set the rules and regulations as long as we adhered to those rules and regulations. And we stuck rigidly to those. And it was about letting people through the doors and stuff. It had to be members. It was a strict rule. It had to be a member. At the time, we didn't realise that it was building this database up of all people, you know, that's come to been to the venue, which was a huge advantage to us when we left Venue 44 eventually. So I would say the Carl Cox Concept Event 3 was one of my most memorable experiences, and the fact that we went on till 10 o'clock was probably a good one. We then went on to do artists' birthday parties and put parties on for them. The Carl Cox birthday, the Slipmatt's birthday, where we let the artists choose the entire lineup themselves. You know, it's about them wanted what they wanted for a party. Those events sold out. And don't forget, we're not talking online tickets. You had to go and physically buy a ticket from a shop within 2 days.
Wow.
You know, yeah, we was ringing shops up to get tickets back because it sold out so quick. There was, you know, you'd put your tickets out on Thursday, by Saturday, you'd sold out.
Wow.
It sold out, you know. So you're manning the phones, listening to everybody coming on to become members. You was getting members coming from Bradford and Leeds and Yorkshire and Lincolnshire and Skegness. And, you know, we was only printing 10,000 flyers for the events, you know. But by the, no online promotions back then. It was flyers. It was word of mouth, you know. It was, I think by the Carl Cox Concert, we handed less than 2,000 flyers out. But we handed them out at the end of every night. So by the second event, you'd got the third flyer. And so people was waiting for the tickets to come out for that event. You know, so as soon as they got the flyer, the tickets was in the shops. So as the event finished on in October, I think it was September, October, November, we did as the October event finished, you got the flyer. And by the time we took the tapes in the shop, the tickets were ready for the Carl Cox concert. So by Monday, the whole tickets had sold out.
Wow!
And in a month in advance.
So I mean, you started at Venue 44, but you did expand out. And I know that you've said when we've spoken on the phone before that you never wanted to go and sort of rival in a way those, you know, super mega big raves. You did do some pretty mega big raves, including Fantasy Island is one. And I mean, tell us about the logistics behind putting on an event of that magnitude. It must have been insane.
Well, we went from Vibealite when it's essentially closed down. It was a different type of scene up in the Midlands. You know, it wasn't, you know, we all come from the rave era. There was Bogey and Gary Bangham from Pleasure Dome. It was going over to them. It was our like sister event, if you like, although they started up before us. There was Stuart from Destruction, and then later on Paulo with the Uprising. I don't think it was called Uprising at the start, but he was doing a Thursday night when we was doing a Friday. He was getting 800 people in on a Thursday night. There was all sorts of things, you know, kicking off. So I've lost my train of thought there. Sorry.
All right. I'm talking about moving to Fantasy Island because that was one of the
right. So yeah, we didn't move to Fantasy Island first. We went to Bradford, Windsor Baths, and because we was approached by the guy that owned the record shop in there called The Disc at the time, and he was one of our biggest tape pack sellers outside our Nottingham region. You know, he was saying whatever you put in the shop, we sell basically. We've got a venue for you. Would like to come and look at it? And we was desperate for a venue. We had done Fantasy Island. Fantasy Island came about from the Pleasure Dome. It was quite a big feat to pull off. They'd moved from the little pubs on the sidewalk of Skegness to that big cap dome. It was a natural progression. It was a time when the scene was splitting and it had been pigeonholed, and it was a time when we could split the scene, if you like, but have different styles of arenas. so that if you was fully into drum and by this time people was moving more into drum and bass. By the end of Venue 44, we'd done a vice versa. So if hardcore was playing upstairs, drum and bass was downstairs. Then drum and bass upstairs, and hardcore downstairs. So you always got what you wanted. So as a raver, we understood that people's music tastes and that was changing. You know, we'd always kept him with a house scene from Renaissance. We'd always kept him from hop to trot. We understood that what people wanted or what people.
So in a way, your hand was forced into going into these big multi-arena events just because the way
it was a natural progression.
The music scene was going.
It's evolved. It was evolved. You can't control. You couldn't control this thing. You know, it evolved. You've seen a gap in the market. You know, we was probably one of the first people to do a multi-arena event, indoor multi-arena event. Fantasy Island gave us that. You know, it was one of them. I think the first Fantasy Island was '96. I think Ultimate New Year's Eve party, and it was unheard of. It was unheard of to do 9. I think it was 9 arenas, but the venue itself.
You must have been bricking that. I mean, what a lot of layout that is.
Well, I wasn't really bricking it. I was in a position to know what I was talking about and know what the DJs wanted. And it was Gary and Bogey that funded it, the first original Fantasy Island. I don't know what other backers they had in there. And I come on as a consultant and I hosted arenas. And by that time, I'd got Tomorrow's World had been set up, which was a techno night, which we'd seen a gap, which was the third event that we put on at Venue 44. So we built up we'd seen a gap in the market. No one was doing techno. No one was doing trance. It was being played at the Helter Skelters and the Dreamscapes, but no one was doing it in like a club and type environment. So we'd got Rewind, which was an old school night that we banged in as well. So when you come to do Fantasy Island, we've got Vibealite, Tomorrow's World, Rewind. You've got your Hot to Trot boys. You've got your Creme de la Creme. You've got your Pleasure Domes. We got 6 or 7 arenas between us anyway. Do you know what I mean? It was like, so we could specialize in those fields with artists and DJs that specialize in those fields, if you know what I mean. So you would put in the same production value on it, cost 9 separate arenas, but held that small, you know, I think the biggest room was 3,000, 4,500 was in the Dome, which was obviously going to be the Pleasure Dome Vibealite Arena because that was our biggest thing. The drum and bass room would be 1,800, your house room would be 1,000 or something like that. It was a massive achievement. But one of the things that Vibealite was renowned for was the venues that it chose. You know, the Venue 44 was it was an amazing place to be. The artists that performed there told you that, you know what I mean? The likes of Carl Cox, he wanted to do the Carl Cox concept there. Windsor Baths was another one. It was, you know, Fantasy Island was an indoor theme park. I don't know if you know it. You've been yourself, you know what it's like. It's like having Rave at Alton Towers. You know, the production was already there. You know, it's like the production was the venue. You know what I mean? The fact that it got roller coasters.
Now, in a way, did that make it a little bit easier for you because you already? I mean, it already looks pretty spectacular.
It looks pretty spectacular. You know, that first event we did, I think we spent an absolute arm and a leg on it. You know, we that 80-foot pyramid that's the centre dome, and you've got the water slides in the middle of it coming down, and you've got the hot air balloons and the roller coaster rides on the outside and everything like that. That was all going off while the rave was happening. Do you know what I mean? It's like it was purposely built. It was theme park. It was and it was to put a rave on there. It was like, gee, yeah, I want to do it. I don't care how much. I don't care if you don't pay me. I just want to put an event on. It's like, you know, just let's get on with it. Let's do it, so to speak.
Well, we hope you're enjoying today's episode of Raw.
But now's where we ask you, inevitably, for your help to keep this project rolling on. We're a tight-knit team of 4 working part-time for free, taking no wages at this project to create this podcast, and it's quite a serious undertaking alongside our normal day jobs. Hopefully you can see from our progression from audio to video in the few months since we started this podcast that, thanks to your ongoing donations, we've managed to improve our equipment. And I'm pleased to say your generosity means this podcast now washes its own face in terms of costs, which is absolutely great news. And thank you so much to any of you who've donated. We've got big plans for the future, but we aren't going to be able to do it without your support. So if you want us to keep making Raw, you're going to need to keep on funding Raw, and that will help with the cost of renting or buying recording kit and paying expenses to travel the country and interview more of your favourite rave artists from the 90s. So if you can spare anything at all, no matter how big or how small, you can do so at gofundme.com/the 90s Rave Podcast. That URL again is gofundme.com/the 90s Rave Podcast. And if you're not in a position to donate, because we know it's a tough time for everybody, you can instead help by subscribing and sharing our content on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. You just need to search for Raw, the 90s Rave Podcast. Go and do that now, please. Massive love and respect to each and every one of you. Hope you're enjoying it.
So, Gary, you've talked about a lot of your early events and some of the biggest ones. Let's talk about some of the artists who you book, because that's what everyone really wants to know about. They want to know who's a really great person and who's a bit of a shit, right? So, this is where you might come into your own. Which artists for you and your crowd always went down well?
Let's start with Majika. Can't take it from Majika. He was a crowd pleaser. He knew what to do, and he still does to this day. You know what I mean? But as a person, complete twat. You know, I'm saying.
I mean, he will be listening to this, so we should probably.
I'm sure he was.
I think he's all right. So there you go. We've got
my opinion, right? Dealing with him as a raver, he was excellent. He controlled the crowd. Dealing with him as an artist, and I hadn't seen this until I became a promoter. So it was really hard to understand. You know, I think it's Majika's story to tell. I hope one day that you get him on here.
I think he's going to come on fairly soon.
I'm sure he's got plenty of stories to tell.
And I suspect, having watched this, he'll call you a twat. So there you go.
Like I say, I'm hoping that what happens with this podcast is that all the DJs and artists that have got grievances between themselves can air this out, but understand it's not about an individual artist. It's not about me as a promoter. It's about the part that Vibealite played. It's about the part that Majika played. It's about the part that Dreamscape played. It's about the part that World Dance played. It's about the part that Shelley's played. It's about the part that all these Amnesia houses and Fantasias and the Ravers played. We all created this scene that's lasted 30 years. If this platform can allow us to come together and air these grievances out, but not show any malice, then that's why I'm doing this interview. To hopefully, I was, you know, didn't want to do the interview, but this is why I've done this interview. You know, people have got grievances. Do you know what I mean? And there was, at the time, it was really important. You'll go on to hear about the grievance that I had with other promoters. I mean, it pissed me off. You know what I mean? It's like, artists piss me off. If I book a DJ over the phone and I agree a fee with the DJ over the phone, and then he turns up at the venue and I give him his money before he goes on, and he says to me, I'm £350 now. And I went, well, when I booked you, you was £150. He went, well, yeah, but that was like 2 months ago. I'm a much more high profile DJ. So how do you deal with that? I have respect for this guy as a raver, but as a promoter, my word was my bond. You know what I mean? That's what I come to understand. So how did I deal with that? I'd say, okay, you're on the flyer, you're playing at that set time. We agreed £150, all right? You're telling me you're not going to play unless you get £350. You've got two options. You either take the £150 and you go home, right? And I'll tell the ravers what's happened, right? Or you go and play your set, and then the next time I book you, we agree a price and we'll pay that. You know, so I got a sort of I had to toughen up.
Did anybody
really
go home?
quickly. I had to toughen up really quickly. You know what I mean?
Did anybody go, all right, I'll take the money and go home then, and I'll take my chances?
Well, no.
Okay.
No,
So it worked. It worked.
So it worked, you know. I'm not holding that against them. They was naive, you know what I mean? They was new artists to the scene. They was breaking into the scene, you know, understanding DJs' career paths. Everybody wanted something different from the rave scene. You know what I mean? Artists like wanted it. Checked. You heard Flux, how it turned his life around. You heard MC how it turned his life around. It turned everyday people's lives around. So it gave them something to look forward to look after. Do you know what I mean? It was like, it was personal to those people. So people wanted different things out of it, isn't it? It's what you wanted out of it. And Majika from the offset was really good at selling himself, if you know what I mean. He was
well, I mean, whether you like Majika or not as a performer and as a person, he still continues to do that. He's an incredible publicist. You know, he's an incredible publicist as well, and he's a good businessman.
I 100% agree.
You know, just because you don't, you know, one might not like someone's personality, you can still give them respect in other ways. Yeah. Yeah. It came to head with me and Majika quite early on. I think if I'm looking back through the flyers, I think by 1994, Majika had been dropped off our Vibealite flyers. Right. And why? Like I say, it's Majika's story to tell. Why did you drop him off the flyers? Majika dealt with issues with his culture and his family. Do you know what I mean? That, like I say, that's Majika's story to tell. You know, he came from a very difficult background. His parents wanted him to be a doctor or a lawyer or a solicitor, and he wanted to be this rave MC promoter, and he could see what he wanted to be. So he had his own challenges, let's put it that way, and he hung on to the rave scene, and it was all his answers. He wanted it. He could be someone. He could make something of himself, you know. And fair play to him. He was very good at doing that. There was a lot of things that led up to this, but the clincher was at the Pleasure Dome one event, and Majika was our resident at the time, and I was stood in there. Murray was there from Dreamscape. The Adrenaline Boys was there, and all of a sudden, Majika just grabbed the microphone, and as a raver, to stop a rave was like, it was an undone thing, you know what I mean? And someone had called him in the thingy, that's not right, it should never have happened. But as an artist, to stop a rave when, as a raver, you've lived all week, you've had a shit week at work, or you've had a shit week, you're just there for the moment, to take on that, stopping on a rave and erase this issue that should never have happened, was like, as a raver, it's just like, everyone's just stood around going, what the hell, you know, what's that got to do with now? But wearing my promoter's hat, that could happen at Vibealite. I wasn't in control of that. That could happen at any point. And I think that was the clincher deal to the breakup of me and Majika, alongside loads of other things, you know what I mean? So, but Majika's gone on to be an artist and always will be. Well, I have never ever doubted his talent. Don't get me wrong. When we get him on, Gary, I'll ask him about that racist incident, because you know what? Look, I'm not a promoter. Yeah. I've never done that. But if someone, if someone, it's not going to happen. But you know, if I felt I'd been abused in the worst kind of way, I don't know how I'd deal with it, and I don't necessarily know. No, I don't. I don't necessarily know that I would judge someone on how they dealt with it, but. Yeah, you know, it's difficult to know unless you were there at the time and you were that person. It was a decision made in the moment, right? Whether I was right or wrong is a completely different story. Right. There was other things that was personal to myself and Majika leading up to that.
But that was the clincher, I think.
Well, that must have been
whether
difficult.
It was right or wrong.
It must have been difficult because he was a popular MC as well for you. So you're like, well, you got to balance it with, how much you enjoy that, dealing with that person and what they bring to the rave. Who else did you find was a bit of a pain? We'll go on to the people who were a dream in a second. But who else did you find was a bit of a pain?
I didn't really find the hardcore. I mean, the Easy Groove was a bit of a pain. He turned up at the venue. The very first time he turned up, that third event, for instance, he turned up with a crew of about 15 or 20 people, none of them members. I could have get them in.
Suspect that
he refused to play.
Ribs might have been one of them because we did an interview with Ribs recently. He lived with Easy Groove at that point, and they used to just travel around the country with him, just being his sort of crew and MCing. So I wouldn't be surprised if Ribs was with him.
It may have been, but as a private members club, they're not members. They couldn't get in. They're artists.
You couldn't sign people up on the night.
No, you had to be 24 hours in advance. That was one of the rules and regulations. So I couldn't get his crew in. He didn't understand it. It's never been heard of. Every rave was licensed.
Right.
So I had to take him to one side. I had to explain this to him. And in the end, we got members that signed them in at the time. So we eventually got them in, but it was a long process. Do you know what I mean? He was refusing to play his set, and then went on to play till like 8:30 instead of and that night sort of thing. But I didn't really have trouble with artists. I appreciated where that people wanted other things out of the rave scene. Do you know what I mean? I didn't really want it to be a business, but by the time I left Venue 44, it was definitely a business. By the third, fourth event, it was.
How did that impact upon your enjoyment of it all?
It impacted. You have to understand as a rave promoter, you was responsible for everybody in that venue. So you couldn't be a raver, so to speak. You was. My enjoyment died. I couldn't dance on the dance floor without somebody coming up and shaking my hand every 5 minutes. So I lost that capacity. So my job was to make sure that everybody was having the best time all the time.
Well, because I've spoken to a few people in the past, and they say, well, in fact, I read an interview with Doc Scott as well, who said this. He said he started putting on some events more recently, but historically had never wanted to because he's always seen promoters, and it doesn't matter if it's a banging night, they've made loads of money, they always look stressed and miserable.
Yeah. There's a massive roller coaster, and I mean, when we're doing Vibealite, it's every month. So, thinking about the stress that we was putting ourselves under back then, we'd have an event on the Friday. The tape packs eventually going up to 5 and 6 packs. So, we'd have someone come down and collect the masters after the night. We'd have the single tapes ready for sale on the night, but the masters would go off to be produced. They would be produced, and then on-body printing and everything like that. They'd be coming back to us on a Tuesday, Wednesday. They'd be packed on a Thursday, and in the shops for the Thursday, like a 4-pack or a 6-pack. This was like, so you'd just done a 10-hour event. You'd done, and back then we did Friday nights, and then we'd have a hot trot on a Saturday. So you'd have Monday off. You was knackered. You was doing 48-hour shifts, and then going to bed for 6 hours and coming back in and doing another 24-hour shifts. We was putting ourselves under a lot without any gear or anything. This was naturally our working day. It was hard graft, and it was a skeleton of people. It was Glennis and Dave and myself basically that was packing these tapes, and we had 365 shops at one point, one for every day of the year. It was like that was the merchandise side of it was much bigger than the actual event. You was getting out to people.
Were you making more money from the merchandise from the events?
Oh, certainly, yes. I think
really?
Money came from it, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then when we announced the jacket was just an instant success. So,
well, that bomber jacket's gone down in history. We've had quite a few people asking us if you'd ever do a re-release, because at the moment with this 90s rave revival that we're going through, quite clear, you can see it, I can see it, we can all see it. I think they'd sell rather well.
That's an ongoing issue that I'm fighting at the moment. But yeah, I own the design, I own the rights to all that. So yeah, I can do that. And I suppose if there is enough demand for it, then maybe. But
well, look, if anyone's
bear in
watching this,
mind-
they can comment below, right? In the
yeah,
comments.
yeah, comment below.
This will be the test for you. A, if anyone's fucking watching it and paying attention, but B, if people do want the Rave jackets, comment below this, and then Gary will know whether there's at least a few people that might buy them in the future. So
The whole thing about that Rave jacket was, the other promoters was doing those, but they were doing embroidery or they was doing print on jackets. That logo, if you've still got one of those jackets, and loads of people have still got those jackets, the jacket would drop away from that logo. Once that logo was decided upon, we actually spent, like, back then, I think it's about £1,800 to get the embroidery plate made. And that's a big investment to make, but going from the tape sales and what we'd produced from the tape sales, we knew that the merchandising was the right way. That's where we earned the money from, which allowed our events, or the ticket money, to go into the events to allow the production. So when you're going on to your big licensed events, there's a lot more to deal with. These were our two key points: that the production at the events, every event being different, every lineup being different, and the merchandise. So going on and doing a big Fantasia style event or Castle Donington, there's licensing issues, and there's all those sort of, which absorbed into your time. So we didn't have that team to do that. Do you know what I mean? We didn't have the team to do that at all. So yeah, artists. I remember saying to a house DJ once, as a laugh and a joke, "Oh, I much prefer you on the radio." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because I can turn the fucker off." It was a house DJ.
And which ones were a dream to deal with then? Who were the nicest guys in the scene?
I think, again, in my opinion, no one ever came across as unnice to deal with. We had, we never threw anybody. We threw one person out, which was Goldie at Fantasy Island. Goldie was a massive artist in his own right. He did a Fantasy Island event. Something happened. Someone was looking at his girl. Something happened. We had to throw him out, but the security had to throw him out. We had to evict him from the venue. And that's the only sort of artist where I had really any problems with. And I got to myself, if someone gave me a hard time or an attitude or something like that, then it just wasn't going to get booked. But I didn't want to fall into the trap of the events all looking the same. When Mickey Linus was about, and I can't remember the name of his events for the life of me, but it had gone very all drum and bass orientated. You know what I mean? It had gone that way. We wanted every lineup to be the same. There was such an array of artists out there that was coming through. Your Ixie was breaking through. Your MC Sharky was breaking through. He wanted to become a DJ. He played his first ever set at Vibealite. We gave him that break. We allowed artists to develop themselves. We pulled MC up from London. We had this fantastic artist that went from drum and bass into happy hardcore. So he fitted right in with what we was trying to achieve. You know what I mean? It was just the way that whole things evolved really quickly. Do you know what I mean? It's like.
Were there any DJs? All right, so you didn't necessarily not get on with them. Did any just fall flat, and you thought, well, they're not for us, and we're not going to book them again?
No, not really. The highlight was booking DJs when a DJ didn't show up later on, when DJs didn't show up, and was booking an unknown DJ. Bearing in mind, we'd be getting tapes sent into us as promoters for DJs. I had some serious demos sent in by that have now become massive DJs in their own right, and I have their tapes and their bios and what they used to be, and some of them are quite funny. You know what I mean? It's like what they wanted to achieve back then and what they've become is totally different to what they wanted to achieve, and seeing that. We ended up setting up a platform because we couldn't deal with so many tapes and CDs coming into us back then. We set up the Crafty radio station to allow DJs, up and coming DJs, to perform. So they built up a base around the DJs online when this had come back. This is, again, when I come back from Australia, I think. So, this is after 98. I went to Australia in 98. Bearing in mind, what people don't understand is, as I mentioned, going back to when Venue 44 was raided, that court case was probably 92 when it got raided, I think. Court case went on and on and on, and they was trying to find all this drug dealers' money and etc. They couldn't find it. They prosecuted Dorman. Dorman went to prison for it. They tried to get the managers involved and the owners of the building involved. And by 94, I was the back end of that chain, because I'd come in, the club was about to close, and I revitalised this club with block booking it, and then having Hot to Trot come in. Getting Hot to Trot to come in, starting the Tomorrow's World nights. So the police and the authorities were looking for all this missing money that supposedly these drug dealers had made. So I became under a tax investigation from sort of 93 to 94, well, from 94 onwards, really. And while ever I was running Vibealite and Fantasy Island, it didn't really bother me at first, but it got more and more aggressive. I had to have chartered accountants. I was dealing with interviews. They was trying to find money. I had to declare everything that I'd made. I had to go through all my paperwork and all my bookwork and lay this out. So I was completely upfront with everything and the authorities. But that weighed on me, and that weighed on me right through the whole process of Vibealite, even through Fantasy Island events. And I think it really got to me probably before I went to Australia. The guys that was coming over from Lincoln had said to me that they was going to Australia for a trip out to Australia. And I just thought, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to go there. I'm going to have a bit of time out and go there. And it was the court case that the authorities had finished with me. We agreed to pay a certain amount of tax that they discovered that we hadn't paid, etc. And the case was over, and I hadn't realised at the time how much pressure that was putting under me, and it just built and built and built and built, and until some days, you couldn't think anything else. You're thinking, well, I can't do any more. You've got everything off me, and when that sort of ended, the Venue 44 had closed. When it had moved on so many chapters. And it was such a release. The scene had started taking a much different approach to it. It had evolved into something that was, like I say, uncontrollable, really. So yeah, that was a big. No one really knows that was going on. People close to me knew how much pressure that put on you, but it didn't. One of the worst events I put on, for personal reasons, was probably the Corn Mill in Huddersfield. It was an unusual venue. We had to put marquees up. We had to do all sorts of things. It was just stress from one day to the other. But going back to the Fantasy Island events, you think they'd be the hardest events to put on, because there was so much involved. But you had John Woodward, who owned Fantasy Island, and we'd walk around with him at an event, and we'd say, this room's going to be the house room. We've got such and such a promoter that's going to be in there. We'd have a sound engineer and a lighting engineer for that individual room, who would report back to the central station, which was the ticket office, which was Gary and Bogey's place. We'd have a sound engineer and a lighting engineer for every room in that thing. So if anything went wrong, they reported it back. But to walk around a venue like Fantasy Island with John Woodward and say, we want to take that track out, we want to turn this go-kart track here into a rave cave, what's that going to expand? And to take that up, it's going to cost $5,000 to take this out. It's going to cost another $3,000 to put that back in. Okay, we'll do that. What about that ride? Can we have that ride riding while it's going? Can we empty the water out there, make that another dance floor down there? And anything's possible. And you'd walk round, and it did be, right, we need to put some steps down here. and he'd just click his fingers, and he'd join us building the steps, and he'd move around the corner, and some metal work needed to be done, or we need to put fire doors in it, and before you walked off, the work was started. It was like so instant, you know what I mean? It was the event was really easy to do because it was just the production side of it was the venue. You know, it just left us to doing things like making sure people were queued in. Bearing in mind, when we did Fancy Island towards the end, there was 16,000 people.
Wow.
We never queued for more than 40 minutes. 40 minutes. No one queued for more than 40 minutes. Unheard of again to this day. You know, you still queue for longer than that now. You queue for that now to get into Audi.
That's true. To be honest, I suspect that our what we accept in queuing has changed since the midnight coronavirus.
X amount of pressure, X amount of raw.
Can I talk to you about some of your residents? Because you had Fergus, Rush, Peter Pan. They were your everlasting residents. Why?
Rush became my partner from early on, from going back to the days of Venus. He was a DJ. He was an excellent DJ. He was an unspoken artist, really. He could mix from, like I say, he could mix oil. He was known as mixing oil to water, and the way he did it was unbelievable. He could go into a drum and bass. He went to Pandemonium once, and the Pandemonium boys, the promoters, it blew them away. It was really dark, and it was really drum and bass, drum jungle. And within 4 records, I think he'd switched the entire dance floor to a happy hardcore vibe. The promoters come up, and the dance floor hadn't moved, you know, and it never ever been done. The promoters going, "How have you done that?" You know, it was just, and the residents played a huge part in the structure of the event. So if a DJ didn't turn up, you knew you had to have DJs that could play the style of the DJ that was going to fit in there. Bearing in mind, I built the whole night like a DJ built his set, that having a resident that could fit into any one of them slots and play a techno set, play a drum and bass set, play a hardcore set, made the night flow. So you never lost that, you know, you never lost what you was trying to achieve from the outset, really. And Peter Pan and Rush was just, Peter Pan was a raver from Burton-on-Trent, come to Vibealite. We gave him a chance on the mic. And to be honest, they just clicked off straight away. They became a team. They became the top buzz of the North, if you like. You know, it was a different era. It was just they became residents to us. They understood what we need. Fergus jumped in on the 2nd birthday when Carl Cox hadn't shown up for his
own birthday.
It was the 2nd birthday, Vibealite's 2nd birthday.
Oh,
at venue
not his birthday, right? Fine, okay.
No. He turned up for his birthday.
Okay, fine.
That was the 3rd event. But this is how it changed from, so Carl Cox is our 3rd event, the concept, in 93. By 94, Carl had decided that his career wasn't the rave scene for him. Do you know what I mean? That's a big decision.
How's he got on since then?
Sorry?
How's he got on since then?
He made the right decision, didn't he? This is, you know, I have this thing with Carl. He was the ravers DJ. He had time for absolutely everybody. He got there early because he knew it'd take him half an hour to get from the door to the DJ because everybody wanted to shake his hands. He played to the crowd. He knew his job. He was the 3-deck meister. He never stopped moving. He was the first DJ that was interactive with the crowd. He got off on what he was doing, and the crowd picked up on that. The crowd buzzed off on that. He could have gone a long way, couldn't he? Really, you know.
he still might. You never know. Carl, if you are listening to this, stick at what you're doing because one day you might make a success of it.
It was a hard decision. When he didn't turn up, it was he played at Doncaster Warehouse that night. It was only down the road from us. The road, it was covered in snow. It was a horrible night. I understood that Carl was trying to change his career. He was moving more into the stuff that he wanted to do as an artist and more of the oblique techno side of things, you know what I mean? And even though I was pissed off at the night, the fact that he did it at Vibealite, and he made that decision after coming out of Doncaster Warehouse, that's it, I'm finishing. I respected that. You know what I mean? It put me in an awkward position as a promoter, but I respected that for a man to make that decision when he was at the top of his game in this field, he'd obviously seen something that he thought he could achieve better in his career, and he followed that path.
And maybe he preferred the music as well. You know, you got to say with the way that that sort of music that he was playing with the 4-beat. Yes. It did. Let's be honest. That when we'll come to that in a bit. Let's be honest. A lot of it got rather shit, and he probably thought, "I don't like where this is going. I'm not in for this. I prefer that techno sound. I'm going to go and pursue that." And I think actually, as well, if you've got a business head on it, it's more accessible to more people. Therefore, there's going to be more money to be made, I suppose. So it seems like a sensible.
Let's face it this way.
That's a rather sensible decision.
I spoke to Carl after the year 2000, right? And when he came to Vibealite, right, on his Carl Cox birthday party, myself and Martin made him a Vibealite cake in the shape of the logo. And we had to take that, was quite big at the time. And we made Carl in the VIP room at the venue, which we turned into a chill out room eventually. So that there was no VIP rooms because people were just sitting in there and being VIPs that weren't there for the rave. So we turned it into a chill out room. But at the time, we made Carl Cox wear that T-shirt, right? He wouldn't go out into the crowd with it. In fact, I think he did. I think he actually DJ'd with a Take That T-shirt that night. He was so up for it. It was brilliant, you know what I mean? And then I thought one day I could always use that to get him to come back and do an old school set. And I approached him after at Stoke University, I think at Keele University, after the year 2000. And I approached him and I said, "Look, Carl, I've got this photograph of you in a Take That T-shirt. You're a massive DJ worldwide now. If I put this out to the media, or you can have the photographs if you come and do me an old school set." And bear in mind, it was back then, as a hardcore DJ, he was the top of the game. He was £600. Most DJs, £150, £300. So when he moved over to the house set, he could demand.
I think he might be a bit more expensive these days.
Yeah, he could demand £10,000, £15,000. You know what I mean? He could demand big money. So to say to him, "Come back and play for £600, otherwise I'm going to release this T-shirt. You in this Take That T-shirt." We laughed. We joked about it. And then I said to him, "Listen, Carl, I know I'm asking a big favour here. I don't know any other DJ in the entire world that's played 2 midnight sets on the year 2000. He played in Australia a midnight set and then flew to Hawaii and played another midnight set on the year 2000. Can't get any bigger than that. That's, in my opinion, that's the biggest you can get. No one ever did that again.
And he flew to Mansfield to do a third.
Yeah. So, you know, how could I expect him to come and play an old school skate when he's achieved the? You know. Have you still got
the T-shirt? The picture of him in the T-shirt?
I have somewhere. It'll be in my office in Mansfield somewhere.
I think we should try and dig that out. I mean, not even necessarily for this rave, but just to put that out. I think that would be fun to see Carl Cox in a Take That T-shirt.
I think it will. I've definitely got it in Mansfield with all the memorabilia from the early days that's over there. Definitely.
And what about MCMC? Because we had him on the podcast fairly recently, and he talked about Vibealite and how much he loved Vibealite. Seemed a weird MC, perhaps, to have managed to convince to be a resident at your place. How did you do that?
MC was really difficult to track down. Really difficult to track down. He wasn't on any agencies. It was going through that time when I understood I couldn't book him because nobody talked to me, nobody gave me his contact. And at the time when I listened to his interview, I now realised why. The people was, what had happened to him. So for me, I had to go down to London and I had to go to one of the events he was at, and I had to wait till the end of the night to get hold of him to speak to him to book him personally direct. And he says, who's doing your bookings? And he went, no one's doing my bookings. I'm doing my bookings. I went, well, I want to book you. I haven't got a number. I haven't got no contact. I've been trying to book you for 4 or 5 months. I think he appeared in July 94 because we were still negotiating it. His name didn't even appear on the flyer. He came as a surprise guest MC. So the Ravers had got no idea what he was like, and the Ravers up north had no idea. He was a very southern DJ, you know what I mean? And he crossed, when we went to see him, he crossed that border perfectly from drum and bass into hardcore, and he was one of the very few MCs at the time that could straddle that border, like Peter Pan. You know, he was one of the MCs that could do that. He came up there. Same thing happened. We opened the side door and he come in and the crowd was going for it. He'd been paid in advance. He'd never experienced anything like that. And after his first performance, he could see he wanted to be a resident. You know, we'd lost Majika by that time. He just fitted in nicely. It was no plan to get rid of Majika and put MC there. It was just, it happened, you know what I mean? It was happened. We went out of our way to get him. And he was a diamond, really. He was like, because promoters up north was much different, you know, than the southern promoters. It was a very hellish idea down there, promoters down in the south. But promoters up north helped each other. That's why we could do these multi-arena events. We'd all come together to put the event on. I was prolific in helping other promoters get their tape packs out, for instance, and stuff. So we all worked together. We all spoke to each other. We wouldn't make sure our events collided with each other. It's a different vibe up north to what it was down south, basically.
And in terms of issues that you've had, you've alluded to some issues that you had with authorities. What sort of stuff were you facing from the authorities? Because obviously, you know, it's a working men's, particularly the start, working men's club, no alcohol. We all know what's going on.
The reality of it is they were still fighting in the town centre. There was no trouble at this venue. It was just that there might have been drugs there, you know, etc., etc. They was trying to close us down. We ain't got a license. They couldn't take us off it. It was in a whole new ball game for them. They would try and get in as non-members to try and close us down that way. Once that didn't work, because we had a strict policy, and once we realised they was trying to get in as members to try and close us down that way, we just got the doorman to up the game. So if you came with people and you was a member, you was asked who your guests were, and you had to tell us your guests' names, and the guest had to produce some instructions, you know, a driving license or a passport to prove there was the person there was. If they didn't get it right, they didn't come in. We were strict on that. We knew that the authority was trying to get in. And then you'd have the fire brigade coming and doing inspections. So we ripped everything out, so there was nothing could go wrong there. It was every tactic in the book from and more so at Fantasy Island, really. Fantasy Island, they even came in and they measured the temperature of the water. You know what I mean? It had to be a certain degree.
When I went in 2002, if they'd have measured the temperature of the tap water, they'd need a fucking sledgehammer. It was freezing. It was so cold. I think it was the coldest person. It was the coldest place in the UK on that night, and we decided to go there. It was snowed outside. It was freezing when we got in because it was heated by body heat, and then it was freezing at the end when the people had gone home, and we were stuck in there till the end. So
I came out that event at the night, and it was freezing. And we promoted that event as it was going to be a lot warmer because, you know, in big warehouses it was freezing. We got blowers in and everything like that in every room. We got blowers.
Let me tell you, Gary,
but it was the coldest night. By 2 o'clock, by 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, it was freezing, wasn't it? And you know, people were huddled around these heaters and everything. I come out at like 8 o'clock in the morning and kicked a bottle of water, and it was just a solid brick, and nearly broke my foot.
I had to get a lift back to the station, just blag a lift back to the station, and we were sliding all over these little sort of country lanes as we got back to it was really dangerous. And Richard Wyatt, one of our listeners, and by the way, if anybody wants to get in touch with us to ask any questions for future guests, you can do hello@the90sravepodcast.co.uk, and we're all on all of your social medias, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But Richard Wyatt asks, did you ever have any problem with gangsters or local heavies?
I think in the early days when Venue 44 started, there was definitely gangs trying to own the territory, you know what I mean? So that was stamped out, I think, by the pre-owners of the venue, to be honest. And I think every club experienced that. It was a market that was taken. I mean, for instance, the glass at Venue 44 was all bulletproof. So the people that set Venue 44 was aware that it was going to...
What, in Mansfield?
It was bulletproof glass, yeah. Bulletproof perspex, actually.
Wow.
So, you know, they must have had some experience from that side of things way before I did. There was rumours about, you know, and there was always the chance that, you know, someone that was trying to become your friend, you thought there was a raver, but they had alternative methods to try and get in your venue. They was trying to earn money out of you. They wasn't coming for the music. You had to sort of rule that out, you know. It was, like I say, from being a raver to a promoter, it was a completely different mindset. Completely.
Well, that's it from another episode of Raw. We hope you've enjoyed listening to it as much as we enjoyed making it. We're now on all video platforms, so if you're listening on audio, please do check out our YouTube page for this episode filmed, plus loads more besides. And you can also find us on Facebook, Insta and Twitter. Just search for Raw, the 90s Rave Podcast. Plus, if you can spare just a few quid to help us continue making more great 90s Rave content and hopefully keeping a smile on your face at a difficult time, you can do so at gofundme.com/the 90s Rave Podcast. All donations will be ploughed back into the podcast, including expenses to get around the country interviewing some of your rave favourites and also improving our equipment.